In the last lesson, we learned about the Industrial Revolution of the early 1800s. Those textiles needed to be shipped to locations where they would be sold, so corresponding to the Industrial Revolution, we had additional transportation improvements that we're going to look at in this lesson. We learned in the last lesson that the steam engine was going to replace water power to power the machines in the factories. We can credit the development of the steam engine to Robert Fulton, well, specifically at least adapting the steam engine, putting it on a boat, and creating a paddle boat. The steamboat made moving up a river very easy, and as a result, you had increased trade going both up and down rivers with the development of the steamboat. We can see here by 1820, steamboats were plying the rivers of the West, Mississippi, other western rivers as well, allowing farmers to move goods. Now, the cheapest way to move large quantities of goods is by boat. However, of course, boats need water. So the result in the early 1800s was to dig canals. These are man-made waterways that were used to link two bodies of water, either two lakes or a river and a lake, or two rivers. You can see here 3,000 miles of canals were built by 1850. Here we see a typical canal boat. Note that cargo that was going on a river that then switched to a canal had to be transferred to a canal boat. The boat itself, we can see here, is not motorized. It's actually pulled. We can see the tow ropes. It's pulled by horses that traveled alongside the canal. So this was, by today's standards, very slow, but by the standards of the day, fairly quick, in the sense that you could move a much larger amount of cargo than you could by horse and wagon in a shorter period of time. This map gives us a sense of the canals and actually roads that were built. We'll talk about roads in a minute. I'm increasing the size of the map here because I want to focus on one particular canal we're going to talk about in the next set of slides, the Erie Canal, which we can see in red, which connects Albany, New York, or just outside of Albany, New York, on the Hudson River with Buffalo. So this 360-mile canal cut all the way across New York State. Keep in mind the Hudson River connects New York City with Albany, so in fact you can have an all-water route cutting across the state. But this was more important than that because these lakes here are interconnected, so the construction of the Erie Canal allowed for people to settle in the Great Lakes region and be able to send and receive goods via the Erie Canal. As I was saying, as a result of the Erie Canal, you've got increased settlement of the Great Lakes region, but what you also had was tremendous benefit to New York City. New York City grew significantly because you had companies move there, trading companies, banks, and whatnot, to handle everything related to the canal trade, because everything going into the Great Lakes region or out of the Great Lakes region was basically coming through New York City. The canal was also a benefit to upstate New York because you can see communities developed to cater to the canal trade. It would take about 10 days to go from Albany to Buffalo on the canal, so passengers needed places to stay along the canal and resupply themselves along the canal. So you had towns develop to service the needs of the people traveling along the canal. Let's switch for a moment and talk about roads. All right, we've got roads that are going to develop in areas that rivers and canals aren't being built. We can see here that roads were carved through forests. The National Road, the Cumberland Road, was built by the federal government, but most roads were privately built and paid for by collecting tolls. Right? And notice we've got an east-west focus. And that's not just with the roads. It's also with the shipping traffic. I know on our map again, a number of these canals and whatnot look more north-south than east-west, but the point was settlers were moving west, and through these roads or canals, and other rivers were able to send and receive goods from back east. Lastly, now we need to talk about railroads, because railroads standing in the 1830s are the transportation mode of the future. All right, it is the second least expensive way to move large quantities of goods, and it's certainly the cheapest way to move large quantities of goods over land. All right, we can see here by 1840 the nation had over 3,300 miles of track, but in 1840 that track is located really largely on the east coast. So railroad development is going to be for the future transportation needs, and we'll revisit this again when we get into the 1870s and 1880s time period. So then, just to sum up, the transportation revolution was a series of improvements in roads, canals, steamboats, and then ultimately railroads. All right. These improvements lowered the cost of shipping goods and connected those farmers in the American West with the East Coast markets.